The twin moons of Virex Prime hung low in the sky, casting a ghostly light upon the brutal scene below. The villagers, clad in rough-spun robes, gathered in a circle around the stone pillar. At its base, chained and bruised, knelt a woman with skin like silver dusk and eyes that once held the warmth of 1,000 suns. Cyra, daughter of the Elder Council, had committed the gravest sin in Virexian culture. She had fallen in love with a human. The tribunal had sentenced her to death by sacrifice, left to perish under the unrelenting hunger of the planet's most savage predators. The jungle beyond the village was a death trap, home to creatures with fangs longer than a man's arm and eyes that glowed with predatory hunger. The only thing keeping them at bay was the sacred fire that burned each night, fire that, tonight, would not be lit for Cyra. "May the beasts take you quickly," spat one of the elders as the villagers turned their backs on her. The ritual was complete. As the torches dimmed and silence fell, Cyra's breath came in ragged sobs. She had always known love was forbidden between her kind and the humans who had colonized the outer moons. But she had not been able to resist James. She prayed, not for herself, but for him, that he had escaped, that he had survived. She did not know that at that very moment, James was already coming for her. Chapter 1. The Return. James had been running for nearly 3 days. His ship had crashed miles away from the village. His weapons were nearly depleted, and exhaustion gnawed at his bones. But none of that mattered. Cyra needed him. Through the dense jungle, he pressed forward. He had spent months among the Virexians, learning their customs, earning their trust, until that trust was shattered the moment their love was discovered. They had tried to kill him, and he had barely escaped with his life. But he had vowed then that he would return for her. Ahead, the village loomed like a dark silhouette against the night sky. He spotted the stone pillar, and his heart clenched at the sight of her still form. "No, I'm not too late." With a silent command, his visor activated night vision, scanning the area. The villagers were gone, but movement in the trees signaled that the jungle's predators were already closing in. James sprinted toward her, drawing his last energy blade. "Cyra." His voice was a desperate whisper. Her head lifted weakly. "James, you came back." "Always," he growled, slashing through the chains in one swift movement. She collapsed into his arms, weak from exposure, but her fingers clutched at him as if to make sure he was real. "We have to move," he urged, supporting her as they staggered toward the forest. But just as they reached the tree line, a guttural growl echoed in the darkness. James turned, gripping his blade tighter. A pair of crimson eyes blinked into existence, followed by another, and another. The beasts of Virex had arrived. Chapter 2. The Jungle Hunt. The creatures that prowled the jungle were unlike anything James had ever faced. Towering, fur-covered monstrosities with elongated jaws and curved claws. They moved like shadows, silent and deadly. James fired his blaster, the shot illuminating the night in a brief flash. One beast collapsed, but the others barely flinched. They were outnumbered. "James, the trees!" Cyra gasped. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing her hand, he pulled her toward the nearest tree, leaping onto the lowest branch. She followed, her Virexian agility allowing her to climb despite her weakness. The beast snarled below, circling the trunk. "We can't stay here," James muttered, scanning the jungle. His ship was still far, but if they could just reach the cliffs. A screech split the air, and a massive winged beast swooped down, its talons scraping the tree trunk. The creatures below howled in fury. James looked at Cyra, his mind racing. "Hold on tight." Without another word, he leapt, grabbing a thick vine and swinging across the clearing. Cyra followed, her breath hitching as they landed on a rocky outcrop. The beast roared, unable to follow. For now, James exhaled heavily, pressing his forehead against hers. We're not dying today. Cyra smiled faintly. Not if we kill them first. Chapter 3. The Reckoning. Dawn broke over the cliffs, painting the horizon in hues of violet and gold. The jungle below teemed with restless movement. The beasts were still hunting them. James checked his blaster. 1 shot left. Not enough. Cyra placed a hand over his. There's a way. He frowned. What are you talking about? She turned, gazing at the village in the distance. My people. They fear you, but they fear the beasts more. If we bring them proof of our strength, they will have no choice but to listen. James studied her. You want to kill the alpha? She nodded. If we do, the others will retreat. It was a crazy plan, but crazy was all they had. James knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then let's hunt a monster. They moved quickly, tracking the alpha through the jungle. It was larger than the rest, its fur streaked with scars from countless battles. James set the trap. Cyra, swift and silent, baited the beast, leading it toward the clearing where James waited with a makeshift energy charge. The alpha lunged. James triggered the charge. A blinding explosion rocked the jungle, sending debris flying. When the dust cleared, the alpha lay motionless. The other creatures hesitated. Then, one by one, they slunk back into the shadows. The jungle was silent. Chapter 4. The Choice. Cyra and James stood before the village, the alpha's head at their feet. The villagers murmured, their expressions torn between awe and fear. Elder RHYX stepped forward, his gaze unreadable. You killed the beast. James tightened his grip on Cyra's hand. We did. RHYX studied them. You defied our laws, yet you have saved us. He sighed. Perhaps the gods do not despise your union after all. Cyra held her breath. Finally, the elder nodded. You may stay. Both of you. Relief flooded her, and she turned to James. He smiled, pulling her into his arms. They had fought for love, and love had won. Under the twin moons of Virex, a human and a Virexian stood together, not as outcasts, but as equals. James kissed Cyra's forehead. I told you I'd come back. She smiled. And I will never let you go again. In a universe that sought to tear them apart, they had forged their own destiny, and nothing would ever break them again.